Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the NCRCRD webinar. Today, my name is Maria Marshall. I'm the director of the North Central Regional Center for Rural Development. We have a great webinar for you today. Be prepared, North Central Region, a community planning approach to green infrastructure, hazard mitigation, and flooding. Our speakers today are Salazar, Assistant Program Leader and Extension Specialist for Sustainable Communities with Illinois Indiana Sea Grant, Purdue University Extension, and Purdue University Department of Forestry and Natural Resources. Kara works with multidisciplinary teams. She oversees the development and delivery of programs to support community planning and sustainable development strategies. She's going to be presenting with Carrie McKillip, Extension Educator for Community and Economic Development with University of Illinois Extension. Carrie works directly with community groups and agencies in participatory community planning, strategic planning, community development, resource development, and business development education. She provides training on customer service, generational differences, and logic model development to both the business and nonprofit community. And our last speaker is going to be Ken Hellevang. He's Dr. Ken Hellevang. He's Extension Engineer with North Dakota State University. Ken has provided education and technical assistance related to flood preparation and recovery for more than 25 years across the United States. He has experience gained through numerous flooding events, led Eden and E-Extension flooding projects, and has extensive resources on the North Dakota State University Extension flooding website. So hopefully your presentation will lead people to just flood the website, no pun intended. So welcome everyone. I think this is going to be a great seminar. Kara, if you can get to the next slide. Our next webinar will be April 25th from 2 to 3:30, and that is going to be citing clean energy and spent nuclear fuel facilities, rural opportunities, and impacts. So that's also going to be a great webinar, co-sponsored with the Department of Energy. So we look forward to seeing you in April as well. And with that, Kara and Carrie, I leave it to you.
Great, thank you so much, Maria. I'm very happy to be here, and thanks to Carrie, who we have co-presented on this project a couple of times, representing a fairly large team. We're going to talk to you about an Eden funded project, a community planning approach to green infrastructure and hazard mitigation.
And as part of this project, it was funded by a competitive grant process from the Extension Disaster Education Network. Most of you, if you've seen me before, it's been out there promoting Eden. It is a fabulous organization, and especially if you are interested in networking with people who work directly in disaster education, recovery, and mitigation. We have been around since 2000, or prior to 2000. They were formed as part of the Extension's response to the 1993 floods, and it has evolved to the point where Eden is actually funded by the USDA National Institute for Food and Agriculture, or NIFA, as we all know. And it's part of the Food and Agricultural Defense Initiative, and it's a small part of that. But so there's a broad range of programming opportunities through Eden. And one of the things that was done in the last round was to fund projects such as the one that Kara and I are presenting on today. So if you're interested, and Ken is a long-term member of Eden as well. So if you're interested in this type of work, I encourage you to join us.
And Carrie and I will be tag teaming through the presentation. So we'll be going through and sharing some different examples and activities that we worked on with two communities, one in Illinois and one in Indiana. And as I mentioned, we had a fairly large project team spanning mostly from the University of Illinois and Purdue University in Indiana. But some of our collaborators had moved on to other things. So we expanded our network, which is great. So we also have representation from Iowa State University and Florida A&M University. Our collaborators represent extension educators, extension specialists, and faculty working on climate resilience efforts, stormwater management, and other types of issues related to that. As we started thinking about this project, we knew we wanted to frame the project around resilience, and we had a lot of different types of background information resources we were looking at and wanting to think through how we can best then work with communities and supporting community resilience and hazard mitigation. One of the things that we landed on is the 6-step approach or process for planning for community resilience from the National Institute of Standards and Technology, this planning guide. And so when we were thinking through our program for community planning, we're mirroring some of these efforts from forming a collaborative planning team, looking through and understanding the situation, determining goals, objectives, and plan development. The communities then are prepared for finalizing their plans to review and approve and working on implementation. So we were able to work with 2 communities through these first 4 efforts. And what we were our engagement process is to focus on collaborative planning with broad community involvement. And we'll share with you what we did and how we did that. Carrie, go ahead.
So as part of this process and how I came into this picture is one of the participatory planning processes that I engage in quite frequently in West Central Illinois is the hazard mitigation planning process. And every jurisdiction is required to have participation or to participate in a multi-juris or in some sort of FEMA approved hazard mitigation planning process. In rural communities and rural areas, it's typically done on a multi-jurisdictional process. If you're in a larger community, each community might do their own planning process. But hazard mitigation in a nutshell is basically any action that reduces or eliminates the long-term risk to people and property from future disasters. Or as one of the state hazard mitigation officers from Illinois, one of the former ones, told me one time, good mitigation means that absolutely nothing happens. And so that's really our goal, right? Is to try to create long-term solutions that prevent a community from being adversely impacted from natural disasters.
And the focus that our group took for working on community resilience and hazard mitigation planning is nature-based solutions. And you can see this guide for local communities that we also referenced through FEMA. And in particular, we're working on green infrastructure. So green infrastructure is a broad suite of nature-based solutions that are supporting ecosystem services. We're primarily focused on capturing and infiltrating water where it lands and to prevent polluted runoff. You can see the variety of different types of green infrastructure that our program is thinking about and supporting communities to think through how they can place them for siting, sizing, installation, and maintenance. We more typically are working on rain gardens, bioswales, land conservation efforts, preserving urban tree canopy, and rainwater harvesting, although others we have been providing some support and work around. But you'll see examples on rain gardens and bioswales through this program. Also, in addition to thinking through adaptation strategies through these different types of green infrastructure installations, we also know that this type of work can support climate change planning, leading to mitigation strategies for preserving and increasing green spaces. The project goals that we were working on are to support communities, community resilience and multi-hazard mitigation plans, to successfully integrate green infrastructure practices. And so we do know, of course, that communities are working through a lot of complex climate-related natural hazard challenges. And there are a lot of resources that EPA and FEMA have for green infrastructure, as well as for local hazard mitigation. And our job in this program and working with our partners is to help them synthesize some of that information, work in a collaborative way, and come to some solutions that work well for their local situations and context.
And it's also important to note that the new guidance from FEMA on the local and state natural hazard mitigation plans includes requiring a discussion of nature-based solutions, the manual that Kara had the screenshot of in a previous slide. So it's not only good practice, but it is required in the new updated mitigation plans for FEMA. So it's a conversation that most communities are needing to have now and sooner rather than later.
And to help them do that, we broke our project into 3 different buckets for the deliverables and the engagement activities that we worked on. So we had community engagement meetings that we structured. We're looking at needs, motivations, and barriers, and understanding the perceptions of green infrastructure to help them move forward with this type of planning. We then worked with planning and ordinance development, and we'll showcase 2 of the communities that we worked with. And we did have some implementation support. So for each of the communities, we ran a rainscaping education program that we developed at Purdue, and we did install demonstration rain gardens to support their ongoing efforts. And we're in the process of finalizing an extension toolkit. So in the next few slides, we'll provide an overview of what the communities look like and who they are. And we'll show you what the toolkit looks like and what we did for our planning processes.
So one of the demonstration sites or the pilot sites for this project was a county in west central Illinois, Hancock County. Its western border is the Mississippi River, so they are very familiar with water issues. And it's a very small rural county in population. With only 18,000, most of the people living in Hancock County, if they're not farming or working in the social services in Hancock County, are commuting to Quincy, Illinois, Mount Pleasant, or Keokuk, Iowa. So that sort of gives you the context. It does get significant tourist traffic in the summer. Both Carthage and Nauvoo are very important sites for the Latter-day Saints community. It is where Joseph Smith first located his community prior to moving to Salt Lake City. So Carthage has the jail and where Joseph Smith was murdered. Nauvoo is actually the site of a temple for the LDS community in West Central Illinois and has all that history associated with it. So it does get quite a bit of traffic. Unfortunately, because of the rural nature and the small community sizes, they have real challenges with aging infrastructure. As we all know, the Mississippi is the 800-pound gorilla there. And so as Ken and I were talking before the webinar started, as snow melt starts this time of year is where they really start worrying about flooding. But additionally, they are very concerned, and right before we started this project, St. Louis and the Metro East in Illinois had that severe rainstorm in July, well, before we started the mitigation planning, in July, where they got dumped 6 to 12 inches of rain over a very short time period. So it makes our rural areas really start thinking about what they can do to improve their stormwater handling, which is how we proceeded in the mitigation planning process with this county.
And in Indiana, we worked with LaPorte, Indiana, which is a community it's the county seat within the county of its same name. This is have a population of just over 22,000. This community has a lot of natural resource features, and they are very interested in protecting them. They're just outside of the Lake Michigan watershed, but they're very close, and they have a lot of their own small lakes that people use for kayaking. With their community planning efforts, they're very interested in working on community resilience efforts. So they had an existing multi-hazard mitigation plan. They wanted to use that as one of their guidance and reference documents, and then enhance their own community planning, municipal planning efforts for stormwater management, working predominantly with their MS4 coordinator, who was newly hired. And they're also working on a redevelopment corridor, and they really wanted to integrate green infrastructure. So they were just getting started in both of these efforts, and it was a really great match to help them think through how they can expand the things that they had been doing well and how they wanted to move forward in the future. So the meeting series and the program toolkit will kind of show simultaneously as we're moving forward, and show what we did with each of these communities and what we developed as part of this toolkit. We started with scoping meetings and the introductory meetings, which is always a good idea to do. And in this case, it was really helpful to get the communities organized and thinking through the different types of planning documents they wanted to look at, the types of tools, the different types of groups to work with. And because this was new, and especially in the LaPorte area, working in this broader cross section and thinking through community resilience in a broader way and to support green infrastructure was new for them. And so we were able to step through the meeting purpose and to really hone in on what they wanted to get out of this effort.
And in rural areas, we actually started the scoping and introductory meetings, as we called them, pre-mitigation planning areas. If any of you have worked with rural communities, you know, it's really challenging to get people to the table just for distances. And so we actually brought together all of the jurisdictions that would be participating in the update of the multi-jurisdictional planning and worked through these processes. We just called them some, you know, we did the processes. We talked about scoping and the Rainscape education. We just sort of did it with a slightly different twist because of the different nature of the follow-up and the planning process afterwards.
Which was really great to help us put together this toolkit. So we have some general guidelines and guidance as far as what worked in these two different community situations, and thinking through a planning team, gathering the local leads who will be working with you, having them work through this series of answering questions and identifying what your goals are, and having them be in charge of helping to shepherd that process as we move forward. And then thinking through the workshop attendees. Again, this is a general list for this type of planning effort, but it needs to be adjusted to the local conditions. And it was based on the two types of communities that we were working with. But we wanted to provide the community something to respond to. And it really got them thinking in a positive way, because they had not really worked from this side before. And we also mapped it to the community capitals, which was very helpful for the group to think through, okay, we're missing representatives in this area, in addition to thinking through the technical side of who needs to be at the table to help make decisions, who's also impacted by these things, and getting them to the discussions and engaging in different ways as well. That then led us into thinking through the codes and policies, the different plans that we're going to review, and what we're going to crosswalk and what we're going to support. Carrie was mentioning how they're very focused on the multi-hazard mitigation plan. There were several plans that we needed to crosswalk and look at to see where there might be barriers and opportunities, as well as ordinances that we were walking through. And we pulled out specific pieces that were related to resilience, climate, and green infrastructure and nature-based solutions to help with that policy review. And to do that, sorry, got stuck. To do that, we did use in parts a really nice document from Wisconsin Sea Grant. the Tackling Barriers to Green Infrastructure, they have several different practice areas that set up in this guidebook. So we used that as a baseline. They had some really great processes too embedded in this, and we made it into a little bit more of our own to tailor it to what we wanted to look at with our groups. But we did pull out several of these different practice areas so that we could organize the plans and different types of policy materials, ordinances underneath them. And it made it easier then to look through those. And I'll show you some examples of how we did that. We were able to tackle a lot of that within these meetings. What we heard back from our community groups too is that we needed to do this in a succinct way. They wanted to have fewer meetings and have them in shorter time. So we had some prep work with our local leads, compiling these different policy documents, going through the different information pieces to get feedback on, and worked back and forth with those groups quite a bit before we came to these two-hour meeting sessions. And when we worked together, we had some working groups that were separated into different areas so that we could get a lot of really rich feedback. The first part of that, we had more of the community overview discussion, looking at where the hazards are. We had different interactive activities with maps and worksheets and discussion. And then the second part of that was going through that plan and ordinance review. We did some hazard identification to get started. This was really helpful for the groups to talk about things, and some of the community members were able to identify some problem spots with the engineers and to confirm where some future work needed to be done too.
Another piece that we added into that as well, in a rural county, if you have a larger geographic area, it is probably a good idea to check the national dam database to make sure that they don't have any high hazard dams. And that is one thing that we also included in that risk mapping in the Hancock County area, because they had some old city reservoirs and some lakes that had some at least 2 high hazard dams in Hancock County. In this particular slide, and this is sort of adapted, we use this in hazard mitigation planning as well with some different adaptations, but really helping the community think through, okay, what have we experienced and how could we have handled it more effectively? And almost like a long-term hot wash, so to speak, of an event, and really thinking about where their risks and issues are when it comes to especially water management in this particular area. And so we can really do this as a group, or we can break them out into smaller focus groups to really get those rich comments that we need to really build out those community resiliency plans, because everyone has sort of a different perspective on what could have been done better. But this tool is very simple, but very useful when it comes to getting people to share their past experiences. And so I think this is the document that really got the richest comments from our rural participants.
We did too. This was really helpful, and we adapted it to water-related hazards. There is a more extensive document too that can be used for broader conversations. And we then created these large posters for the code and policy review, and we had snippets of the different parts and pieces for people to react to. And then we were able to take notes if we're looking at a part of the comprehensive plan, or we're looking at a municipal code or revitalization plan. We had that specific piece. We then had the opportunity for the community members to react to it, looking at some strategies for improvement and what some potential barriers are to help make them better too. This worked really, really well. We were able to get a lot of information in a pretty succinct amount of time, and some interesting aha moments came out of it, of where there were some barriers that were tied to strategies too, that we were able to help them with their final report. The second meeting that we held after we held these a few weeks apart so that we could process the community data, we could get some more feedback organized, and then we came in to focus on the green infrastructure strategies. We had an introductory presentation to cover the types of strategies we're talking about, to have common language and provide some additional ideas. We then used a decision support tool through our tipping point planner program that was newly developed to help think through some cost-effective analysis, and had a prioritization activity and next steps. This analysis that we worked on for our tipping point planner model was developed based on Jingchu Chen's work. She's been working with us for several years in communities with the tipping point planner program on green infrastructure placement and siting. So it combines GIS, hydrologic modeling, and cost-effectiveness analysis. We're looking at where we can most effectively place GI practices to have the greatest runoff and potential load reductions and the most cost-effective option. So this is an education tool. We're using this to help communities think through what some of the green infrastructure practices would be most appropriate for their location. We're not doing the specific siting for these efforts, but they are tied to the watershed that we're working in. So for example, we have different types of urban and agricultural green infrastructure practices in these scenarios. We can look at the types of the percent of reduction that a community would like to have for runoff, and see where they're going to have, what the cost would be, and other types of improvements in phosphorus and nitrogen and total suspended solids would be for runoff as well. And so this is the first part of the activity, where we're looking at the different practices and they're identifying what would be of interest to them, as well as the percent of reduction. We're then thinking through more specifically then where some of these practices could be identified, and this is overlaid based on the hotspots of issues that we identified in the previous meetings, as well as in other types of background information and data we had compiled. So based on where the issues are, what the best case scenarios are, where would you like to start thinking about green infrastructure placement? And we ended this with prioritizing the action strategies to help with the planning part. So we did have a discussion as far as tying back what we identified in the policy and code audit overview, what some of the needs were, and then how they could start moving forward with those. This helps us identify what to provide into the final action plan. And so putting all these pieces together, we have a summary report that we're able to provide back to the community that is done in collaboration with not only the attendees at the different meetings, but providing the feedback and opportunity from other groups and for the local leads who will be implementing this effort. So we created an outline of what to provide, and then crosswalking to what their specific needs are. And in particular, looking at some of these different planning resources to help with what to include in the plan and where they would like to provide their focus. And then to wrap up this effort, we have the opportunity to run greenscaping education program efforts in each community. And this is training to provide information on siting, sizing, installation, and maintenance on rain gardens. And so these are smaller scale rain gardens that don't necessarily have some of the larger engineering components. So these types of rain gardens are found in public spaces as well as in individual yards. So something that a homeowner could look at, see, and learn how to do it for their own property. And the idea behind this is that we wanted to leave behind some demonstration rain gardens that are really well done, so that the community can see what it looks like and have some additional support and placement for other places in their community. The site here is what we installed in LaPorte, and this entire area then is slated to have a series of green infrastructure demonstration practices. This is going to be redeveloped into senior housing as well. And this is already a heavily trafficked area for people using the site, and it's going to have even more enhancements for better access and opportunity for engagement. And Carrie, like to talk about the University of Illinois project.
Yes, with the assistance of our local horticulture educator who is trained in the rainscaping curriculum from Purdue, we were able to find a site in Nauvoo, which I mentioned is a big tourist attraction in Hancock County. And he trained not only some of our master naturalists who were very interested in the rainscaping, but we had several community members from within Hancock County, including the community staff that will maintain this rain garden in Nauvoo in Hancock County. And so it's kind of nice. They did it in September because it got to be too hot. And so we don't have any really good pictures of it, but hopefully next spring I'm going to get some really good pictures to get to Kara so that we can really have good pictures showing what it looks like now. And one of the really surprising outcomes from this project, we did the two planning meetings in the summertime, basically May and June. And then we talked about all of the different categories of green infrastructure. And as we've moved forward and we're close to completing their natural hazard mitigation plan for the jurisdictions in Hancock County. And it was very surprising that 2 jurisdictions have included rain gardens as projects in their hazard mitigation planning process, in large part to kind of stack some stormwater management issues, because the money to do upgraded storm sewers in these small communities is often prohibited. One of the jurisdictions is planning on looking at some infill lots in their downtown area and actually doing several of the green infrastructure. And I use some examples here of permeable pavers and then the drainage in a parking lot to show they're thinking about how they can better manage in a downtown area without having to rip up and create new infrastructure. And one of our jurisdictions, one of the larger communities, has put a mitigation project in their plan to look at new ordinances that would require any kind of development to consider and weigh green infrastructure for new development, as opposed to, the current practice in rural Illinois is you build a detention pond, which the mayor of that particular town called the mosquito breeding component of development. So even in a rural area, they understood not only the need for green infrastructure, but some of those advantages of not only the attractiveness, but the management and being able to layer it upon their existing infrastructure. So we were really pleased with that outcome.
Great. And the city of LaPorte is also moving forward with their efforts with their MS4 update and working on their corridor redevelopment. So they are moving forward with the information we provided to help them with their plans and expanding green infrastructure. So that was really nice to hear as well. And so to move forward and to wrap up, we do have the toolkit compiled. We're finishing a few updates on that, so it will be shared. Our intention is to share it on Eden site and ideally on the community development National Library site, but we are still in progress for that. So hopefully later this spring, the the information will be updated there. So stay tuned, and we'll definitely release information when it's available. Feel free to contact us if you have questions, and we really appreciate people attending today. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Kara and Carrie. That was really, really interesting. Our next speaker is Ken. And while Ken is getting his PowerPoint up, we can maybe take a question or two for Kara and Carrie if you have any now before Ken starts. I know there was one, but it looks like with the subsequent slides, you answered her question. So
I had a quick question, and I'm sorry I can't turn my camera on, but are you finding that from some of that GI, those installations, that you're helping to develop a workforce specializing in that kind of thing?
That was the focus for our training effort in LaPorte, and the reason why we wanted to do it. So they had most of their city staff attend and master gardeners, so it wasn't open. Usually our programs like that are open to the public, and it's anybody comes who wants to register. But for this one, we tailor it specifically to their group so that they would have some more background and experience, particularly for those who are new to green infrastructure.
great, thank you, Kara. Thank you for that question. Okay, our next speaker is Ken. Ken, go ahead. Sorry, you're muted still.
There, now that works better. As Carrie mentioned, I've been working in this flood area for a number of years, and I'll share some of those experiences. One of those was a project that the two of us both were involved with, where we looked at the roles of the various extension folks working with disasters and flooding in particular. And so the first slide is that disaster education is a role for extension. I find it continuing to be an issue where some people are hesitant to do either flood education or other disaster education because they just don't think it's part of our role. They kind of think of us as agriculture and maybe communities, but in some of the rural areas, ag is pretty predominant, and people kind of forget that we can play a role in other areas as well. The picture that is part of the slide is from a flood event. We had a major flood occur in Minot, North Dakota, and we had NDSU Extension very much involved, and some of the other people that we interacted with were the local health department, the state health department, FEMA, Red Cross. All of us were kind of working together as a team. And this was a post-flood meeting where it was a Q&A session, and we very much were looked to as partners in providing that educational role. We went through in that regional project that Carrie mentioned quite a lengthy process of looking at what were the roles or responsibilities of the various people within Extension as we go through the different phases of a disaster and primarily a flood event. And I hope that this table is still available on some of the Eden material. I haven't looked recently to see if it's there or not, but I think it's important for us to be, as part of our disaster preparedness, just to remember that all of Extension has roles to play. And we've divided them up into the different preparedness, response, recovery, and mitigation roles. And I guess the one for administrators is to make sure that the system is looking at being involved and providing the kind of the administrative support for the rest of us to do our jobs. And I'm not going to go through and talk about each of the different people and what their roles are in the different phases, but this hopefully can be a tool that will help provide some of that template that is needed as we prepare for and provide education throughout the flooding or disaster event. The first thing that becomes very apparent is that if we're going to be helpful to our communities, we can only be helpful if we have our own things in order. And so we talk about taking care of your family first, making sure that you're doing all the things that we talk about and doing that with your family. And so do you have a disaster supply kit, communications plans in place, meeting place and evacuation routes? That needs to all take place first before we can be a help to others. And then the next step is preparing the office. Depending on the type of disaster, we need to spend some time before the disaster hits, making sure that everyone within our offices know their role and what the plan is should an event occur. There was some comments already today talking about, who do you get involved and how are we connected in the local communities? One of the things that we kind of remind our staff about is that there is an emergency manager in either every community or every county or every region. And we need to make sure that we're connected with that emergency manager. Is Extension part of our county or local emergency operations plan? Back to the Minot event, there was a lot of people that were displaced, a lot of pets and animals that were displaced that couldn't be in the shelters that were set up. And so one of the things that we quickly found out was that Extension is listed related to livestock and animals. And so our people became active in creating places that people could bring their pets, and that became a very major local part of our role in that flood event. But just making sure that we have spent some time with the emergency manager, that we know what our role is, they know what our role is, or how we might be able to help. Our role is going to vary depending on our expertise, and this is a picture that shows a training session. The guy in the red jacket is from the Army Corps of Engineers. The guy kind of standing on the right there, looking at trying to pose well for the picture, is myself. And we were doing a training session for how to build sandbag dikes. Most of the people that were there were city employees that were going to be going out to the city of Fargo and helping to oversee building sandbag diking within the city as we prepared for one of our major flood events. And is that a role for extension? Well, it became one. The blue paper that I have in my hand is actually a publication that we put together on how to build sandbag dikes. We did a video on the same thing that the Corps of Engineers ended up using across the region. So depending on your expertise, depending on what role you want to play, I think there's a variety of ways that we can be involved. It's important, though, that we try to document that, because there'll likely be times where that documentation becomes important. And it's important for us to spend a little time in advance knowing who our staff are, what roles that they can play. And I'll just go through 2 slides of who some of the North Dakota folks are and what their role is. Miranda is the person that is our state lead in connection with state agencies and with the Eden group. And she's the one that is given the task of coordinating things. But there's a variety of us as specialists that have different roles that we can play. And it's important that we spend time in advance, because once the disaster hits, it's too late if we haven't done our work in advance. The next thing I thought I'd talk about a little bit, particularly with flooding, is that there's a lot of information available nowadays on the web, available to everyone. One of those locations is the NOAA flood risk, and I've listed the URL on the slide. But this shows what the current prediction is for river flooding for this spring. And if you look over on the right, if you're not familiar with this data, that the purple is those that are expecting a greater than 50% chance of a major flood. And so if we look at the picture, somewhere in there, and we already heard about the Mississippi, we see a fair amount of purple located in that area. So we look at the rest of the map, not a whole lot showing up as likely flooding areas for this spring. And then we can even zoom in and go to a specific location. I zoomed into that area with these purple squares. And then if you click on an individual location, you will get the local flood map, I call it, or chart. The blue is the long range historical numbers predicting flooding. The triangles are the ones that are for this year. And this happens to be for LeClaire along the Mississippi River. And if we get into this purple area here, they consider that major flooding. And we see that there's about a 70% chance this spring of hitting the major flooding. And so these are tools then that are available that will help us as we start trying to do some planning, particularly for spring flooding type events where we have some time to prepare and get ready. Another location that I find helpful is if you go to the National Weather Service And look at the forecast for any location. It'll list a regional location for the National Weather Service. For Fargo, our regional office is in Grand Forks, and they then list the spring outlook. And it lists the days that those will be distributed. And they provide a lot more information than ever used to be available to us. The last one that was done for the Red River Valley or the Devil's Lake area here in North Dakota is on February 23rd. There will be a new one coming out on March 9th. Again, another nice tool for looking ahead and knowing, is this a year where we need to be doing preparation as part of our educational role? The other place that I'll look is you can go on and also see what the long range forecasts are. And I always take these a little bit with a grain of salt. But we just had some major snow events. Minneapolis got 18 inches of snow a couple of weeks ago. Fargo just got about a foot of snow at a major event. And as we look forward, what we see is that the temperature is going to likely stay cool and the precipitation is above normal, again, in that range that we're talking about. So likely there will be some adjustments made to that March forecast when it comes out. But I keep coming back to our role being education. And we've got a lot of resources on the NDSU website, on the Eden website. A lot of other states have some very excellent information available. But it's always helpful to kind of retool these a little bit to your local situation. So we encourage people to focus on education, but do a variety of different things. Social media works well for pointing people towards our information. We find, that particularly radio, if you get into these disaster events, is a location that a lot of people will turn to, as well as the web today. But I think there's opportunities beyond just the major disasters as we look at the expertise that we have in the ag area. Even if we don't have a major river flood, that we might have wet conditions around the farmstead. And I think it's good for us to just kind of remind people of some of these things. One that I think is amazing is that when you have this piled snow in farmyards and other areas, that there's almost 3 gallons of water in every cubic foot of that piled snow. And so we need to think of where that water is going to run. Where might I have issues that I need to be taking care of? Same thing is around our buildings. And this is looking at a home probably, just with the snow melt coming off of the roof. Are we going to have water issues next to the home that we need to be concerned about? I'll frequently put out news stories, just kind of reminding people that, there's thousands of gallons of water coming out right next to your house. Are we assured that that's going to get away from the home, or is it going to cause us problems? A colleague, Tom Shearer, and I put together some material on sump pumps that gets used extensively. That's our first line of the defense of making sure that we keep our homes dry. And so, again, something that isn't necessarily river flooding, but related to water events that I think are opportunities for us to provide education. So I look at it as being proactive, promoting what resources we have available, working with the media, letting people know of the resources that each of our states has, or regional events, regional resources, Eden resources that we can provide as education. So kind of a quick overview on roles, a little bit on the forecasting and educational opportunities that I think exist. Now I'll turn it back for questions.
Great, thanks, Ken. So now we can open it up for questions. We have about 5 minutes left for either Kara, Carrie, or Ken. And feel free to either put it in the chat or unmute yourself. Well, as people are thinking, I'll start with the question. I know that, we talk a lot about mitigation and planning. And I know there's this thing called, kind of a planning bias. So how do you all deal with basically, Carrie, you talked about that mitigation means that nothing happens, right? But then nothing happens. And so people are like, why did we plan? Nothing, right? There's kind of the planning bias. How do you all deal with that in your work?
Well, at least in Illinois, and I know the same in North Dakota where Ken is, when you're dealing with riverine flooding, they're very used to knowing that floods are coming, so they understand the need for preparation and planning. Fortunately or unfortunately, a lot of times, if there's a weather event that makes the news, then sometimes, and I was really surprised, because if you know anything about the rural Midwest, people are pretty, roll with the punches. We've dealt with this before, but they really are starting to take note of those heavy rainstorms and some of the groundwater issues that happened in Illinois and Missouri last summer. And so I think we're right. I'll use, the tool name, the tipping point, where people are starting to realize that their aging infrastructure and the changes that we're seeing in sudden heavy rain and stormwater management failures are really making people take a step back and take a look at different ways to approach the problem. And my colleague Lisa Merrifield, who came and talked about green infrastructure, it really resonated with some of them. And I think we've been hesitant to talk about that, but when they see something attractive like a rain garden going in their community, it sort of negates some of that.
I'll just briefly add too that many times it becomes an economic decision. So if you have a plan that's been approved and the community is working from it, it means that you can apply for other types of funding. So that really does turn the tide on with certain groups and thinking through, why do we need a plan, or why would we plan? So when we're working with the community and the efforts that I'm affiliated with, we certainly need to make sure that there is an outcome and a next step of why they're going to plan. Otherwise, it's likely not a good fit.
Great. And now we have one question in the chat that says, I'm not familiar with extension. Does each state have an extension priority plan? Does it help give you ideas on what to focus on or what the state sees as risks?
The answer, we can answer that in different ways. We have needs assessments that we do in different ways too. So that's one way that we find out where the priorities are. So either at the system level or at our individual program level, for our particular program, we had several different groups that we've been working with and talking to identify that this program was something that we needed to work on.
And I think it's the continuing communication. I think that is what I will stress, is that we're connected with the state emergency managers. We're connected with the various commodity groups, the ag associations, and even locally, not as much recently, but the city folks knew who I was, and we developed relationships that helped us identify what those needs were.
And it's important to note too, and everybody, most of the people on this call know that every state extension functions a little bit differently, has a little different capacity. And I think the key is finding where your capacity is and how it's not just a community development issue, preparedness and such as a family life issue. It's a youth issue because it's going to impact the youth. And clearly, as Ken pointed out, there's a lot of intersection with ag. So it's just finding where the extension system has capacity to be able to help in different areas and how they're structured.
Great, great. Well, it's 2:01, so we have reached the end of our seminar or webinar, yes. Thank you to our speakers, Carrie, Ken, and Kara, for a really, really interesting webinar. I think you're all going to have probably people go onto your websites and look for a lot of those resources. Again, thank you all for being part of this webinar, and I will see you at our next webinar on April 25th. Thanks so much.